So yeah, the theme tonight is automating text insertion, and doing so in a context-aware manner. So what we're going to start. Oh, by the way, I posted a corresponding blog post just a few hours ago on the Meetup page. So a lot of the, it's this one. You can find the URL on the page, and I'll put it up at the end. So a lot of the code samples we're going to be looking at are included in here, so you can refer to them later as you please. All right, so I'm going to start out with the topic of snippets. Just out of curiosity, who's familiar with snippets here? One, okay. My next question was, okay, my next question was going to be who actively uses them?
I do.
Okay. Two, interesting. Okay.
This is being recorded for the internet too, so there's many more people waiting for your time.
Yes, absolutely. So we have one SnipMate user. What about you?
Yeah.
SnipMate as well? Okay, I'm going to be talking about UltiSnips instead, which, by the way, has backwards compatibility with SnipMate snippets. So give it a try. There's a third one I'm familiar with called XP Template, which I tried out in the past, which is also very cool. So check that one out as well. Let's see, so we're going to head over here. By the way, okay, here we go. So this is the plugin. You can find it on GitHub as usual. So I'm going to start out. I'm just going to go ahead and edit a new shell script called foo.sh. Now, typically, when I go to edit a shell script, I'm going to probably want a shebang here, indicating what interpreter I want. This is something that's probably a good candidate for turning into a snippet, right? It's got a few weird characters. I already tripped up trying to type it. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this into a snippet, and we can take a look at how UltiSnips works here. So UltiSnips provides this function called, or a command rather, called UltiSnips.edit. And wherever you are, it'll take you to the snippet file corresponding to the file type you're currently editing. So in this case, we're going to the shell file type. And I don't currently have any shell snippets, so we're going to create a new one. I'm actually going to use a snippet to create a snippet here. So this is the syntax for defining the snippet. Everything between snippet and end snippet is obviously the contents of the snippet. This tab trigger is the sequence of characters we type to trigger the snippet. We're just going to call this one shebang. The description is for humans. I'm going to just put in a description of shebang. It's followed by some single character flags here. I'm not going to go into details, but this B indicates that this snippet should only be expanded at the beginning of the line, which is fine for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick that in there. I'm going to write the file. As soon as I write the file, UltiSnips picks up on this new snippet in here, so I can go right back to my shell script. I'm going to undo. I'm going to enter insert mode, and I have completion here for snippets. It integrates with uComplete Me, by the way, so that's convenient. So I'm just going to hit tab to expand this, and ta-da, there we go. One additional point I'd like to make, we can always go UltiSnips edit to jump back to our snippet. Snippets, just like in SnipMate, can include tab stops. There's a special tab stop called $0, which indicates where the cursor should wind up after the whole snippet's done. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. If I write the file again, UltiSnips picks up on the change. So I can go back, undo this, and there we're left on the next line. Okay, nothing too extraordinary. But this brings me to my next point. I'm probably going to want this in every shell script I write. I'm not saving an enormous amount of time by typing in snippet name, expanding it, whatever. But this is where the concept of file templates or skeletons comes in. So a file template, it's a similar concept, except you start out with the text automatically. It's there already. You don't have to manually insert something from insert mode. There are tons of plugins out there that give you file templates. I even wrote one before arriving at the solution I'm about to show off. There are really simple methods like just hooking into the buff new file auto command and reading in another file. I think that's what Vim's help actually suggests. They have a little example of that for C. And then there's the really elaborate that does all this extra stuff. I said I wrote a plugin to do this. It used like template files that would read in, much like the Vim suggested method of doing it. But it sort of bothered me that I was using two totally different mechanisms for two things that were really similar. There might be some case where I want some boilerplate code in all new files of a certain class or whatever, but there are times where I might want to manually insert it, so I have to have two copies of the snippet, one that's a template and one that's a snippet. So I've sort of massaged snippets into file templates. So I'm going to show you what I mean here. We're going to jump back to the snippet definition. I'm going to assume every shell script I'm going to write is going to have a shebang at the beginning. I can actually just rename this. I can choose a new tab trigger. We're going to give this a special name, _skell for skeleton. I'm going to write that. I'm going to edit an entirely new file. This doesn't exist on disk yet. bar.sh, and it's inserted. Every new shell script will now have this text in it. This is a rather trivial example, but you can see the potential here. So I'm going to go through the code I used to make this happen with UltiSnips. This requires a little customization. So I'm going to jump into this after plugin, UltiSnips custom file. If you don't mind, I'm going to decrease the text size a little bit so we can see a little bit more. Okay. So what's going on here? So I'm going to go ahead and gesture at the screen. So we just start off with a typical guard. You'll find a guard in the beginning of most Vim Script files. This first part is pretty much irrelevant to us. So we're just gonna, this is a detail I didn't mention. UltiSnips depends on Python. Maybe a drawback for you, maybe not. So we're just bailing out if UltiSnips is not available because Python's not available. The finish keyword just stops the execution of the script altogether. And then we're setting up an auto command group here. This is actually irrelevant to us as well. So this should be familiar if you are familiar with autocommands. In case you're not, an auto command group groups together a set of related autocommands. Typically, you'll have one group in your script. And then this is an arbitrary group name. Obviously, the group ends here with the end keyword always. I have this autocommand bang line here. What this does is it clears all the existing autocommands in this group. What this lets you do is source the script over and over again without building up autocommands that you've defined. I've defined one here. Without this, if I source the script, there would be two autocommands, identical ones, firing on the buff new file event. Vim has no way of knowing that these are duplicates. It's just blindly sourcing the file again. So if you clear your autocommands, it's scoped to the autocommand group, so you don't get that problem. Okay, on to the interesting stuff. So I'm defining a new autocommand that's listening for the buff new file event. This event fires every time you load a buffer that doesn't have a corresponding file on disk, which is exactly what we want, right? In this case, we don't want to touch files that already exist, because that would be a mess, right? We'd be inserting templates into existing files. And then that's followed by a pattern that matches the buffer name. We're using this glob to match any buffer. And then it's followed by this function call here. We're gonna just, there we go. Okay, so this is an autoload function that I've defined. You can tell it's an autoload function by the hash symbols in there. So at this point in execution, Vim has not read in a definition for this necessarily yet. But when it sees this, it's going to go find the corresponding autoload script, load it. If there's a definition for this function in there, which there is, it'll then execute the function. We need to use the call keyword here. Every line of Vim script has to start with a command, which can then be followed by a Vim script expression. So not every context where you're calling a function needs the call keyword, but in this context it does. Like in an assignment, for example, it's part of a larger Vim script expression. The command that starts a variable assignment, for example, is let, right? So in this case, we're just going to call it, and I prepended silent here, which suppresses any output in the echo area at the bottom, the command line. Typically, when you edit a new buffer, you get a little message at the bottom, and we don't want to wipe that out, so I'm just sticking silent there. All right, so we're going to take a look at the definition of this autoload function. You know, based on how it's named, where it is. It's in an autoload directory in my configuration. It's in the util for utility directory within the autoload directory. It's in a file called Snippet.vim. And this is a unique function name in that file. So let's take a look at that. Autoload util. Oops. Okay, I'll get it. Sorry. Snippets. Okay. And we're gonna, okay, I'm just removing a few things that are extraneous for our purposes. All right. So here I'm defining this function. Again, the bang redefines the function, so if I source the script again, it's not going to complain. I have this abort keyword here. Normally, when Vim is executing one of your functions, if it runs into an error, it spits out an error message and it keeps going. Abort suppresses that behavior. The first error it encounters in this function, and it will just cease execution of the function, which is good in this case. All right, so here I'm setting up another guard, essentially, within the function. It just aborts if UltiSnips is not loaded. But more important, well, in addition to that, I'm going to get rid of this. Because this function can be called in various contexts, I'm not sure what context necessarily. I'm making sure the buffer is empty here before trying to insert a template. So this line function, excuse me, with the $sign argument, grabs the last line of the buffer, or the last line number of the buffer. So we're comparing that to 1. In other words, there's one line of the buffer, and the contents of that last line is nothing. So in other words, the buffer is empty. And then I'm checking that there isn't a corresponding file on disk. Because if there is, we don't want to mess with it. Okay, if we get that far, then I'm calling a script local function that does the actual work. And I'm passing in this skull template name. Okay. All right, here's the meat of it. So this takes one parameter, the template name, and its purpose is to insert a template using UltiSnips. So execute, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of times, it takes the result of the following expression and evaluates it as Vim Script. So it's like eval in any given language. So everything here is getting evaluated as a command. The normal command does the following thing in normal mode. Bang prevents mappings from getting resolved. So what we're doing is we're hitting the I key essentially, and thus entering insert mode. We're typing an underscore followed by the template name we want. It's hard-coded to skell below for skeleton, which is the UltiSnips trigger for the snippet we want. Then we're hitting Control R, which inserts the contents of a register in insert mode, followed by the register name, which is, in this case, the expression register. If you're not familiar with that, what it does is it prompts you for a line of Vim Script and inserts the results into your buffer from insert mode. So you can do, I don't know, math with that or any number of things. But in this case, we're using it to call this UltiSnips expand snippet function. And that's the way you programmatically expand a snippet in UltiSnips. It's a function provided by UltiSnips. Now, we don't necessarily have a skell template defined for every file type. So there's a chance that this won't expand, and we're stuck with underscore skell in our new buffer. Fortunately, UltiSnips tells you whether the snippet expanded successfully or not by setting a global variable, and we can just check that. If it's 1, great, we're done. The snippet's already expanded in our buffer, done. If it's 0, it did not expand, and in that case we want to issue an undo to clear our changes, and it's as if nothing happened. Again, we need this silent command here to not show that undo message at the bottom.
Those silence make me think that Vim doesn't know if you performed an undo from Vim Script from a plugin or from your keyboard hitting the U. Am I right? So in the script, you have to tell it silent because I don't want my program to be messing with the state of the, I don't know, the front end, let's call it. Which is weird because if you're programming Vim Script, I thought the default would be the opposite, right? Typically, it doesn't give you any output, and if you do want that, then you would tell it, well, actually now, yes, change the status to the content there or something. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So you both have been writing plugins? Would you be happier if the silent was actually the default?
I would, yeah. I guess. See, one of the cool things about Vim's language is that the interactive API is exactly the same as the programming API, sort of like a shell. So, instead of hitting U for undo in normal mode, you can, this is a regular command line command alternative to undo. In the sense that it works exactly the same way if I type it in the command line or I have it in the script, I kind of like that, but yes, it needs to an API that's a little bit hard to work with sometimes in that way. Okay. So I've introduced templates here. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit to making it a little smarter and context aware. In a sense, this mechanism is already context aware in that the right template is inserted for the right file type. Because UltiSnips gives us that as separate. It segregates its snippets by file type. So we get that for free. But there are other ways in which the context matters. So I'm going to give you a little demo here of some PHP files. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit a random PHP file, new file. This is a very simple template. PHP was designed to be embedded in HTML, and hence you have these delimiters around all PHP code. Unfortunately, this is required in every PHP file you write. The end tag, assuming our file just contains PHP, the end tag is optional and usually left off. So I need this for any PHP file. But I'm going to go ahead and CD into a dummy project I set up called Meetup. Get out of here. I'm just going to go ahead and edit a random file in this project, which happens to use a framework called Kahana. The details aren't important at all. But Kahana requires some extra boilerplate code at the top to guard against accessing scripts in a way that is undesirable on a web server. I'm going to go ahead and edit a configuration file in my application. That lives in the application config directory, and let's, I don't know, edit the a new configuration file for database credentials. Okay, so we get a little extra boilerplate. This is where, you know, some key value pairs would go for a database connection. I'm going to go ahead and edit a class file now. That lives in application classes. Let's make a user model. We get different template there. Okay, so this is the context awareness I'm talking about. What makes this possible? Another plugin, this one by Tim Pope, called Projectionist.vim. It's essentially, I believe he went over it briefly at his talk here some months ago. I don't think he talked too much about it. It's project configuration. You can tell Projectionist about the structure of your project, and it gives you some conveniences like navigation among files. So for example, instead of using the edit command here as I've been doing, I could have just as well done emodel user2, and that would get me same place. Projectionist is great. There are two ways to set it up, at least two ways. There's a global Vim Script dictionary where you can define project types. And it also has the option of placing a JSON file in the root of your project. So that's like a per specific project method of doing that. That's what I've done here. Nope, not what I wanted. We're just gonna, yeah. So this is what the JSON file looks like for this project. These keys here in the root of the object correspond to file paths, obviously. This and it uses globbing much like a shell. So this first rule applies to all files in my project. You can refer to specific files in your project. Here's the README. And then for these files, you can specify metadata about them, essentially. This type thing gives you those commands, those edit commands. So since I've defined this doc type, I can use edoc, and that'll bring me right to the README. Okay. And then I've defined some information about my PHP files here, including this skeleton thing. So one of the cool things about Projectionist is you can actually define arbitrary data about your files that you can query later. So I've used this to define which template I want to insert into which groups of files. So I showed you that class example. That's inserting the underscore class template. And you can get as specific as you want with that.
I've got a question.
Sure.
You actually showed with models, but I didn't see that you defined the skeleton key in the models part. Did I miss something?
Right, okay. Thank you for asking, because, right, that's an important point, is that this is sort of has a cascading effect. So it's actually inheriting this. Everything in classes gets this class template, and that's what you saw for models. Even though I've specified a special model entry here, it's inheriting the less specific rule above. So in fact, this framework thing, which is also not Projectionist specific, it's something I stuck in there for my own purposes, all files in the project inherit this framework value unless unless subsequent rules explicitly override it. All right, so we're going to revisit that Vim script I just showed you with some additions to make this work. Because just defining the keys in this dict isn't sufficient, obviously. Let's see. Yes. All right, so I'm going to issue a couple undos here. Okay, so after that guard, making sure, again, the buffer's empty and all that, I added back this new block here. Projectionist has two autocommands that it can fire. Just like we hooked into the buff new file event, Projectionist defines a couple new events for us. One is Projectionist detect, which runs every time Projectionist goes to detect a project. That is to say, anytime another event happens that Projectionist wants to hook into, it fires this Projectionist detect event. That happens to fire on buff new file, so I'm not hooking into it specifically. The second auto command is fired when Projectionist actually finds that this is a project that it recognizes. That's the Projectionist activate auto command. In this case, we don't need to worry about that one. But when it does activate, that is when we're editing a buffer that belongs to a project that UltiSnips recognizes as a project, it sets a buffer local variable called Projectionist here. And so I'm just checking to see on this, again, this is firing on the buff new file event. So whenever that happens, we're in a new buffer. I can check to see if Projectionist has activated this way. If it has, this is not empty, and we can continue here. And then we can call this Projectionist query auto command, or autoload function, with the key we're interested in. So I named it skeleton. Get the root for the projects that activated, which we're not interested in here, and then the value of that key, which is what we are interested in. And we pass that value to that same function we looked at before that tries that insertion. UltiSnips may or may not expand the snippet. And if you recall, we returned the result of the expansion. So if it fails, we keep looping through that dictionary until something does expand. And that's where we get a cascading effect where we can override values for the template name. And it also ensures that everything works out if we haven't defined a particular template. It'll just fall back to the next one, right? And then in the end, if none of those Projectionist-specific templates expanded, we still can try this fallback one called skip. Okay.
Would all of this happen if you rename the file instead of just making it?
If you rename a file.
So, like if you rename a file to something else.
It exists.
Like something.
Sure. Yeah. Because, yeah, if you rename something through Vim, it's going to be creating a new buffer. So, yeah. This particular code won't fire because it's an existing file in that scenario.
You change the file type though on the new file or run the new file type.
If you change the file type, you're not going to get the new template because we're depending on the buff new file auto command, which would not fire again in that case. But we could just hook this function into the file type auto command and
Exactly.
have that work. All right. So,
Question on skeleton.
yeah.
Do you have your own mappings, like by default, for example, the one for opening new shell scripts or new PHP scripts, or for example, to create a new function? Or do you just provide the tooling to make that easy for the users of Skeleton?
Well, first of all, I'm the only user of this. This is not a standalone plugin. It's just something I've sort of built up over a long time. I rely largely on, for creating a new file, for example, I rely on the projectionist commands, like emodel or whatever. Those all get set up if I've set up the corresponding project type. So in that case, yeah, I'm relying on commands rather than any sort of mappings or anything. As far as using snippets in existing files or whatever, I don't do as much of that as I do rely on the template thing. All right. Okay. Yeah. So the final topic here, which ties into the context awareness. Now we have context awareness for the file based on the file type and the path, right? And the type of project and so on. But there's another way we can get context-aware templates, and that is in the actual contents of the templates. So I could define, for example, a separate template for models specifically and a separate one for controllers, but you notice I didn't do that. I just have one for classes. And it's smart about, within that class snippet, it's smart about what to put in. I'm going to bring up the user. Yeah, like, oops. So you'll notice that, actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. Let's start with something simpler than this class file, then we'll get to this. So I'm going to just edit a random markdown file, a new document.md. And let's say we want to create a new template or a new snippet for inserting like a title heading in our markdown document. So I'm going to go ahead and run UltiSnips edit. I have no markdown snippets currently, but let's create a new one. Let's just call this title. Document title. The B flag again is fine for us. I'm going to use this syntax for creating a level 1 heading. Obviously, we don't want the same title in every document, so let's base it on the file name. So one advantage of UltiSnips over something like SnipMate is that it gives you not only Vim Script interpolation in the snippet, but also Python interpolation. I'm not a big Python guy, so I stick with the Vim Script. What that means is when the snippet is expanded, we can actually evaluate Vim Script embedded in it to get some dynamic placeholders here. So so the syntax for that is the backtick bang v for Vim Script, and then it's followed by an expression that gets evaluated. Here we can just use the expand function to get the buffer name. We don't want the whole path. We just want the file name, not including the extension. So that's tail gives you the file name without the directory structure. R for root gives you, it chops off the file extension. So we can go ahead and save this. We can go back to our markdown file, we can insert the title snippet, and there we go. that's okay. Why don't we make an improvement here? I'm just going to call a custom autoload function I have for this purpose. It's called UltiSnips. What is it? Title. I'm just going to wrap this in that function. We're going to go back. We're going to undo this. There we go. That's a little bit better. All right. So that's Vim Script, interpolation, and snippets. I'm just going to jump back briefly to the there we go. So there's actually a lot of this going on in this snippet. What to put up here after this opening tag is actually done this way. Obviously, it's figured out what class name I want based on the path. Nothing too fancy there. It knows who I am. This is not hard-coded. It knows what year it is. It's figured out that the parent class I might most likely want based on the fact that this is a model and the framework we're using and what I probably want to inherit from the framework's form.
Where did you encode that information? That probably a model in this framework extends or.
Well, I'm getting to that. So Projectionist helps here. You may have noticed in the Projectionist.json file I was defining the category for different class types based on the path. So that's where this comes from. That comes directly from the Projectionist definition. My name, it grabs that from the Git configuration, local Git configuration for the project. It looks for a project.author configuration variable in the local Git repository, or it falls back to just the regular Git author if it doesn't find that. You can imagine how this is put together. I'm just going to go ahead and show you. I have some libraries of functions I use in these snippets. I'll just briefly show you one. Autoload. So this is some of. So this function takes care of inserting the right guard at the beginning of the file. This figures out the class name based on the file's path. This one figures out the parent class name. So we can yeah, so here's that category key I was talking about. And we can, okay. Here, so here's how the class snippet looks. Just basically a bunch of calls to these various functions that are created to, make the template a little smarter. I guess at this point, I'll open up to questions. I mean, I've basically covered the three main things I want to talk about, which was snippets, how to use them for file templates, the how it works with Projectionist, and then this Vim Script interpolation business within snippets.
Do you have your dot files on GitHub?
Yeah. You can browse through that stuff. You can find that through my website.
Cool.
A link. Yeah, I might as well put some contact info. This is me.
Oh, yeah.
The best way to contact me is email, which you can also find my website, which is at this address. And for any PGP users, here's my PGP fingerprint. And again, that blog post that contains the code for UltiSnips is posted on the latest post from today. Yeah, so I'll open it up to any further questions. All right.
PHP is Vim Script that you created for working with this framework, right? In that, like for example, class PHP, and you call path to class name. That's your own code, right? Like that's the one that you showed before that, for example, understands which is the parent. So in this case, it would be called like the framework, because it's specific code for this framework, and right? If I download that from your GitHub,
Okay.
I'll have automated. I'll have a smarter Vim for this working with this framework.
Yeah, I've tried to generalize it a little bit so that, yeah, the framework I work a lot with is called Kohana. I don't think it's particularly popular, but the PHP framework, that is. But this function is generalized to work with anything, but it has special case rules for if this looks like a Kohana project, or if Projectionist tells me it is, then I'll do this. Otherwise, I'll do something more generic.
It's really clever. I like it.
I want to port everything to my programming language that I'm using all the time, which is Ruby.
Yeah.
Today I was with Sublime Text User, and he was like, "Can you do this in Vim?" Tab, and auto-complete a class and methods, and I'm like, "Well, as of today, actually, I can."
Yeah. I know Rails.vim has a lot of this built in, and that actually, as of recently, uses Projectionist to give you those
Snippets.
yeah, to give you at least the navigation commands. I don't know what the status is of where the template. I think it has. I'm not a Rails developer, but I think it has file templates, some sort of functionality built in, and that probably at this point is using Projectionist. Yeah, that's something I didn't mention. Projectionist.vim has a file template mechanism of its own. It's a little more rudimentary because, well, it's not really suitable for what I want because it only works on projects that Projectionist knows about, obviously, and I want something that works everywhere. And also, the templates are not dynamic in that, yeah, it can do some things with the file path, but you can't execute arbitrary Vim script. You just pass it like a list of lines, and it does a few substitutions, and that's it.
It's really powerful.
Thank you.
Thanks.